I think we should talk about the seal, Bob. It's a lawsuit that you file. The United States, you find a company, and let's say it's a drug company, and they're bribing doctors, or they're off-label marketing the drug, or they're violating whatever law they violate. And you blow the whistle. Internally, you get fired, whether you're directly fired or they make your life so miserable you have to quit. You go to a lawyer like Bob, and you tell the story. We file a false claims lawsuit, and it says the United States of America, ex rel, and that stands for the relator, the person who tells the story, you. So it's United States of America, ex rel, relator versus, Pfizer, Sanofi, any one of these companies. But then if you got fired, in addition, we add a lawsuit just for you, and that's you versus the bad guy, you versus Pfizer, you versus whoever. And it's all filed under seal. And Bobby, you want to explain what a seal means? They say in Latin, in camera, right? That's the Latin term. But what does that mean in the real world?
Did it, Joe, was, again, this goes back to the Lincoln law, was back then the government was a lot smaller. So they gave you 60 days to investigate it. And they said no one should know about it except the government and, the person who bought it and the judge. And so the case is quiet. And you look on the docket now called PACER. And if you were to look up a case that's under seal, it just says the number. There's no name, no anything. And when we file the cases, the first page is actually under seal, XREL, under seal versus under seal. And then the second page actually is the name parties. And what it is it allows the government to investigate. And they, like I said, it's supposed to be 60 days. Normally what happens is they want to get the relator in to have a relator's meeting and have the relator relay.
Nothing happens for 60 days in the federal government.
Right. Yeah, that's what back in 1863, maybe it did. And I mean, that wasn't the shoddy case wasn't hard, right? You have a bunch of naked Union soldiers out in the field.
Yeah, but the point of it is that the entire process is a secret and it's under seal. So if you work for a big company and you come to lawyers like Bob and his partner, David Stone, and you tell them the story and they file a lawsuit, your name doesn't come out until the very end of the case, when the government has settled the suit. Now, what is that? That could be 3-4 years. So I have clients, and you do too, who have been under seal. See, they're worried that I want to go get another job. So they go to another company, but they're worried that if it comes out that they blew the whistle on the first company, that they would lose their job at the second company or get mistreated. And just the first thing I want to tell people is that, these cases, your name stays sealed until the government unseals it. And usually the government unseals the case. The government can decline your case or intervene on your case, but it takes them years to make that decision sometimes. So your name remains under seal. If they intervene on the case, it continues to remain under seal until they've done the full investigation and they're ready to either go to trial or settle the case. And then at one point, your name comes out. But usually, your name comes out at the end when there's a settlement, and that's when it happens.
A press release, usually.
Now, talk about a decline case for a second, Bobby. If the case gets declined, that means the government is not saying it's not a meritorious case. It's saying they're not going to proceed.
They don't have the resources. They're looking at other cases, et cetera.
Case get unsealed, Bob, when it's declined.
It does.
Like if you want to go forward, If your law firm decides to move forward without the benefit of the government, you have that right. And under the law, you get paid a mandatory amount of 30% if you win.
30%, right? So they give you an extra 5%, but you do all the work. And of course,
but at that point, the client's name comes out, correct?
Right, because the government will file a declination order. And the court then says, we're going to unseal the whatever the operative complaint is, whether it was the first complaint, or if it's been amended or changed somehow, that complaint and this order saying the case is declined, it's now unsealed, and it becomes a regular litigation. We have to serve people within 90 days. The lawyers, they get hire lawyers. They ask us for an extension. They generally file a motion to dismiss your case saying if everything they say is true, there's no legal basis to proceed. You fight about that. A lot of courts are now saying while the motions to dismiss are pending, which take 6, 8 months, a year to decide sometimes, that discovery will begin. So we begin asking written questions. We ask for data. We ask for documents.
Yeah, I have a case. I have a friend of mine. I just had dinner with him this week. He runs a company, which is a laboratory that tests the quality and the makeup of pharmaceutical drugs. And he was responsible for a case against the company GlaxoSmithKline. And there was 2 cases that was created. He founded the drug called Zantac, and I'll probably interview him on the show. Yeah, he's a smart guy, but they basically that the drug Zantac contained nitrosamines in it, which is a product that if nitrosamines are in your drug, they get pulled off the market because there's a certain amount allowed and beyond that, and it causes cancer in rats. So if you want to cause cancer in rats, you give them nitrosamine. In his case, there was one case of mass tort, and we won't talk about that now, but there was a false claims case, and the government declined the case. They said, we don't want to proceed with the case. His lawyers took the case anyway, proceeded, and they got a $70 million settlement, of which the whistleblower gets $21 million. And that case literally got paid this week. So the government declined the case. The whistleblower took the case with his law firms anyway, without the help of the government, and was able to get a settlement of $70 million, of which $21 million is being paid to the whistleblower. And now the government, you think about that. First off, if the government had taken the case, they probably would have gotten a lot more money.
More money, right? They can debar you, so you never get to deal with the government again.
But here, if the government had taken that case and the government had gotten that $70 million settlement, he would have probably been paid 20%. So the government ended up paying an extra, they paid an extra $7 million that they wouldn't have had to pay had they taken the case. So I just want to get the message that if the government declines your case and you don't mind your name being out there, in this case, he didn't mind. There are a lot of meritorious cases that settle for a lot of money. That case for $70 million against GSK was declined initially by the government. And it's a righteous case. We call it a righteous case. And the mass tort settlement was $2.2 billion. Which that client gets no part of, because whistleblowers can get paid on whistleblower false claims cases. They cannot get paid on the mass tort case. And sometimes the mass tort case, my first case with you guys, my first big case was a case that settled for $1.2 billion, right? What was the Risperdal case?
Well, yeah, Risperdal was 2.2, Joe, against.
Right, but my case wasn't. The false claims case wasn't, right?
Yeah, right. And that's, and the reason these QUTAMs started, it was originated in England because they needed individuals to do what the government couldn't. So they said, interesting historical fact, the first Congress after the Constitution was passed, it contained 45 people who either signed the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution itself. And they had 10 different QUTAM laws in that Congress. So they said, there's talk now saying the QUTAM statutes are unconstitutional because you're becoming like an agent of the government and an officer of the government. And I said, it's crazy because I was a commissioned officer of the United States government. When I was a captain in the Army in Panama, I signed contracts that bound the United States government to pay for labor, ammunition, food, whatever I needed. And that's what I could do as an officer of the government. As a Ketam lawyer, I can't do anything like that, right? It's like I can bring a case, I can right a wrong, I can help prevent people from getting injured or sick. We can get money recovered for the government, and from that they give you a reward. But so, today's world, you're not sure. We were wondering if the Department of Justice would withdraw from, the Zavaroff case, it's called, down in the Middle District of Florida, where the judge said, I find the Quitam's statutes unconstitutional. And I said, it's strange, the first Congress, with all these people who created the government, created the Constitution, got us free from England. They use this as a regular program to get things done when the government didn't have the wherewithal to do it. And they just don't have, eyes everywhere. And so they need people out there in these different industries, healthcare, defense, looking over people's shoulders. And like I said, the companies, if they kept the whistleblowers in house and resolved the issues, companies could self-report, right, Joe? And they could then tell the government, and the government takes all of that into account, and a lot less is usually paid.
Very few companies self-report.